Welcome back, bienvenue, and all that jazz. It's time to continue the wrap-up catch-up that I have been trying to do the last several months. So this is part 4, where I'll be talking about the books that I got to in the month of August of 2024. So without further ado, I have a lot to talk about, so let's just dive straight in, shall we? So in the month of August, I got around to reading 16 books technically, although it was 11 books and 5 manga, but manga still count as reading, so whatever. You can't convince me otherwise. So that totaled for 6,136 pages and just shy of 60 hours of audiobook listening. And I had so many good reads in the month of August. I am not kidding you. I had an average rating of 4.53 stars. So we love that for me. I loved almost everything I read. There's just a couple kind of more mediocre books that I got to. So with that being said, let's go right into those mediocre books. So the least favorite read that I had in the month of August was Dust of Dreams by Steven Erikson, and this was a 3-star read for me. This is book 9 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. It is the penultimate book of that particular series, and it was just very long and kind of boring and tedious for me personally. And I know that there was a foreword from Steven Erikson talking about how this book in particular was, books 9 and 10 are kind of like split. And so they are meant to be like one larger volume, but they were published in 2 separate volumes because it would be too large. And like, I'm sorry, but like you should not be writing 900-page first halves of a book. And I'm not convinced now, after having also read book 10, that the majority of this was necessary. And so maybe if you're somebody who fills in the blanks more than I do with the characters of the Malazan Book of the Fallen and you just love them more than me, maybe Dust of Dreams is it for you. I don't really know. I don't know what the larger consensus is on this particular installment in Malazan, but for me, it was just a little tedious, shall we say. It wasn't bad. It wasn't the worst of the Malazan books that I've read. I wasn't particularly mad about anything in it. It just exists. And I don't want to say too much because it's kind of all wrapped up in my larger feelings of the overall series. So maybe at some point, if people are interested, I could do a should you read Malazan? Because I probably have a very different opinion than most people who have actually read all 10 books in the series now that I know what the conclusion is. So if you'd be interested in me doing something like that, feel free to sound off and let me know. Anyways, we'll continue right along. And so from the 3-star read, everything else was 4 stars and above. So the first 4-star read I'll talk about was City of Dragons by Hobb. I want to say this is book 3 in the Rain Wild Chronicles quartet. And like I said for the previous one, I don't totally remember what happens in book 3 versus book 4. I feel like we reached the place that we were on a journey to reach at this point, and we are starting to learn more about the lore of the dragons, but we get most of that lore, I feel like, in book 4. So in this one, we start to get more lore just on the Elderlings at large, and we have some more character interactions and some shenanigans afoot, and it is decent. Like, I don't have any strong dislike of the Rainwild Chronicles. I don't love it either. It is kind of okay for me personally, but I will just reiterate, not YA. This is the one that I remember having some pretty like graphic, gross body horror things that I was like, oh. So just be aware of that if you go into the series. But continuing right along, the next 4-star read I will talk about is Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. This is the first bind-up of the Rhaeria Revelations, which I am a very bizarre person, and I have been reading his books in in-world chronological order. So while Rhaeria Revelations was the first books that he published, they are the last books that I am getting around to reading because I'm chaotic and whatever. And after having read Theft of Swords and the follow-up Rise of Empire, I'm kind of glad that I started with the Legends of the First Empire because it's just more of what I want from the fantasy genre. The Theft of Swords in particular was fine. If you're looking for something that feels kind of like an episodic kind of buddy cop adventure, then I think this could be really fun for you. If you're looking for something that's like the most... Katya is like dangling off the side of her scratching. So apologies if you hear her in the background. But if you're looking for something a little bit more epic in scope and I don't know, like more traditional epic-y fantasy, this isn't really it. It's very kind of contained, episodic adventures. So it was fun enough, but like it's not a new favorite by any means. And then the next book I'll talk about is I read Long Live Evil by Sarah Rees Brennan, and I also gave this book 4 stars. And this one is interesting because it is one of those very kind of meta books where it's kind of poking fun, especially at fantasy romance. And if you're not into super meta kind of snarkiness, then I don't think that this would work for you. I would kind of compare it to something along the lines of like a Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, but if she was in the Neverending Story, because basically our main character has terminal cancer and she gets offered this deal to get transported into the kind of storybook world her and her sister used to love in order to find this magical flower to like save her own life. And so she does that, but when she does so, she gets transported into the body of one of the villains of the story and things kind of ensue from there. I will say that if you're expecting it to be particularly like evil, it's not going to be that. She is still like very good at heart. And so I don't know, the campiness, especially in the first half, is kind of a lot. So like, I don't know. Just be warned going in. I feel like it does take itself a little bit more seriously in the back half, and there is kind of a cliffhanger ending where I'm intrigued to continue. And I was also kind of like moved when I read the author's note at the back that the author actually was kind of fighting cancer when she was writing this book. And so it just kind of added an extra layer of like, this was her way of healing, kind of escaping as writing and like kind of art imitating life, if you will. So I think it's a fun enough time. So if you're looking for kind of like a palette cleanser of kind of this very campy meta book in between other things, I think it could be a lot of fun. Then the final 4-star read that I had for the month was Long Live the Pumpkin Queen, and this is by Shea Ernshaw. And this is a story of Sally from The Nightmare Before Christmas after the events of The Nightmare Before Christmas. So I think it's really geared towards people who are kind of my generation, who grew up watching and adoring The Nightmare Before Christmas and just kind of want more of it. It has a fun kind of twist where Sally accidentally releases the Sandman and hijinks ensue in Halloween Town. And we also get to go and visit a lot of the other holiday towns. We get to go to the Easter town and Christmas town and Valentine's town. So a lot of towns that you don't see directly in the film, you get to kind of visit. And so it was just fun for that. And I think it's really just, if you are obsessed and love The Nightmare Before Christmas and love Sally and want to see what happens next with her and Jack, then this is a really fun little thing. I don't know that if you've never seen the film, if I would say jump into the book right away. I feel like the film will give you the buy-in or not to love this book or not. But with that being said, that concludes my 4-star reads of the month. So I'll now transition into my 4.5-star reads, of which there were 3. And the first one I'll talk about is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is book 1 in the Between Earth and Sky trilogy. And it was a lot more kind of intense and dark than I was expecting. We follow our main character, I want to say his name was Serapio, or one of the main characters. It is a multi-POV story. And he goes through some really horrific things with his mom to be transformed into a vessel for a god to kind of enact revenge on these people that came and kind of displaced his peoples. And so it is a quite dark tale that I think book 1 was the best in the trilogy. I've since finished this trilogy as well. Book 1 was fantastic. It was so much fun. There were so many twists and turns and like explosive things. And the world building was based on like a pre-Columbian Latin America vibe. And so I love having things that are from other mythologies than the traditional European, as I always say. So it is just a good time if you're looking for something that's a kind of more fast-paced, I would say probably kind of plot-focused romp following these different perspectives and these different characters and kind of getting embroiled in the Gods Among Us shenanigans of it all. But book 1 in and of itself was a great time. And so even if you just read it and never continued, I think it's good enough. Like, it was a really fun time. Then the next 4.5-star read I'll talk about is Ghostsmith by Nicki Preto. And this is the conclusion to, I can't remember the name of the duology. Book 1 was Bonesmith that came out last year. And this is a YA duology technically, but I think any age can read it and have fun. It's perfect for the season because it is full of necromancer and bone and ghost magics. We follow our main character who is training to become a person who can sever the bonds of a ghost to their bone. And so in this world, basically, when people die, if the rites aren't done properly, they can kind of manifest as these ghosts, and their ghosts are tied to their bones, and there's different levels of ghostly power that they can have increasing levels of threat. And so there is this group of people who have magic who can find the bones, and then the other group of people who can sever the magic of the bones. There's also ironsmiths, goldsmiths. They can just manipulate different kinds of matter, basically. And Book 1 starts a lot more contained, following our main character as something goes wrong in her testing and she gets kind of banished to this border fort, and she starts finding out more about this previous battle, and not everything is as it seems. And so in Book 2, we get a lot more of this kind of familial drama playing out, on top of learning a lot more about the world and having a lot more twists, turns, and other. So I think if you're just looking for a really fun, like Halloween themed duology and want some fun necromancer action, then you can't go wrong with this duology. Then the last 4.5 star read that I'll talk about was The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is book 1 in the Bloodsworn saga. I got it in there somewhere. And I'm sure everybody has seen this amazing cover with the crazy large dragon. And the reason that it was 4.5 stars for me is, one, there's this kind of irritating thing that he was doing in the book, and I'm assuming that it's because these books are very heavily Viking and Norse kind of culture and mythology inspired. And so every time somebody talks about thinking about something or something happening in their mind or their brain or their inside their skull, it's always their thought cage. And after a while, I'm like, okay, I get it. It's in my thought cage. It's stuck in my thought cage, my thought cage, my thought cage, my thought cage. It was that. And then anytime that there was any kind of sexual activity, it was humping. So it was like between the humping and the thought cages, it kind of stuck in my craw a little bit of just getting a little bit annoyed at kind of what felt like an overuse of these two really bizarre phrases for things. But beyond that, I think it was incredibly fun, and I love Gods Among Us. So we do start to get into some of that, because in this world there are the bodies of these dead gods, and these dead gods kind of have this power that keeps these other monsters at bay. So civilization has kind of cropped up around the bodies of these dead gods. And we follow a few different perspectives. We follow a mom who is on a vengeance quest because something happens to her husband and her son gets taken. So she's hunting down the people who took her son to try to get him back. We're following a couple different people kind of traveling around in different mercenary bands. We have one who's joining a mercenary band because he wants to find out what happened to his sister. We have another one who is kind of escaping her family and all of the things that come along with being the daughter of who she's the daughter of. And all of the different things converge and crazy things happen, and it is like a really good time. So if you're at all like me and you want like epic fantasy with really, like, I think that the characters for me in book 1 didn't totally gel 100% of the way, which is another reason it was 4.5 and not full 5. But things happened in book 2 that I'll come to in my next wrap up that really like made me care a lot about these characters, and I really, really enjoy this series so far. So I can't recommend it more highly. Book 3 is coming out, I think, in like, by the time you see this video, it will already have come out. So it will be a completed trilogy. So if you've been waiting for the series to complete, you now have no more excuses, because book 1 and book 2 are fantastic and you should get into it. Then I'll just kind of lump my 5 manga together, because I reread and caught up on Witch Hat Atelier by Kamome Shirahama, and I read volumes 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So I had read 8 through 10 previously, and 11 and 12 were new for me. And I just love this manga. I have fallen so head over heels with the world and the characters. I love my Keyfree, and it's so good. It's one of those series where it starts very wholesome and cute. The further you get into the series, the more you start to see these sinister underpinnings of what's happening in society at large. And then there's a lot of questions around, just because something is doesn't mean it's the way it should be. And it's so good. The magic is so whimsical. The art is beautiful. It is definitely starting to get dark as well. Like, from where we started with this cute girl who's always wanted to be a witch and kind of finding her way into the witchy world, and just learning about how people train to be witches and what being a witch in this world even means and how the magic works. It just started so wholesome and cute. And where we are now, there are horrific tentacly monsters that I don't know what to do with, and just so many moral dilemma that are just, it's like heartbreaking watching our characters kind of go through it, but it's also so good. And so I know Elle from Elliot Brooks screams about this series all the time, but she screams about it for a reason, because it is so good. So if you've been waiting at all for Witch Hat Atelier, you should pick it up ASAP. There's also an anime coming out, so if you're somebody who prefers watching anime over reading the manga, that will be out soon, and I hope that it's just as amazing as the manga is. I saw the trailers and it just looks so beautiful, and I'm just so hyped for it. But with that, we'll continue on to my other 5-star reads of the month. The first one I'll talk about was a reread, and that was the Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This is book 1 in the Burning Kingdoms trilogy, and I read it because I'm getting ready for book 3, The Lotus Empire, which is coming out in November. And so if you like complex political fantasy, then I can't recommend it more highly. It's so good, and I can't even express it. We start in book 1 with a much more contained story where we follow kind of 3 main POVs. We have Priya, Bhumika, and Malini. And so Priya used to be involved with the temple and is now no longer, because in this world, basically there is this kind of empire that has taken over and kind of crushed the local religions. And so she's working for Bhumika, who is this lady in this smaller town. And then we have Malini, who is this exiled princess whose brother wants her to burn herself alive, and she refuses to do so, so he banishes her. And so we kind of start with that banishment and seeing these characters meet and interact, and then we start to learn more about what's happening in this world. There's some really freaky kind of body horror stuff with the magic, so if you can't handle plants growing under skin, then it might get under your skin if you're reading this. But it is just so good. And then book 2 really blows the doors wide open. I won't say too much more about the Jasmine Throne. I do have a full spoiler-free review video for the Jasmine Throne when I first read it, so I'll link that for you for some more thoughts if you want some more deets on the Jasmine Throne, spoiler-free of course. But I still love this. It holds up so much on a reread. I can't wait to get to my reread of the Oleander Sword and then jump into the Lotus Empire in November. Then the next 5-star read that I'll talk about was another reread, and that was The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. If you ever just wanted a warm hug of a book, it's The House in the Cerulean Sea. It is the sweetest, most queer book that I have read, and I love it to pieces. We follow Linus, who works for Daikami, the department in charge of the care of magical youth, and he gets sent off to this island with these highly dangerous children to see if the person managing that kind of orphanage, Arthur Parnassus, is doing his job and these children are safe. And so he travels to this island. We get to meet the kids. We get to see the budding romance with Linus and Arthur, and it's so sweet, and I love it so much. And if you've ever been one of those people who feels kind of like, I don't know, you feel yourself like you're mediocre or you're kind of mid, and then you find your spot in life and you just kind of blossom and grow into who you are. It has so many themes around that. It has so many themes around just not judging people, and just it's timeless messaging that we still need to this day, because if you see all of the smear campaigns as we get closer and closer to the elections, and I'm sure you're aware, like it's just all smears and grossness and just people attacking each other. So if you need an escape from that and you just want to see people accepting for who they each other are, and just I love it so much. It's so cute, and it's probably one of my favorite books of all time. And I was reading it because there was a unexpected sequel that I never knew was coming that came out that I will talk about in my next wrap up, because I've also read that. So stay tuned for that. But The House in the Cerulean Sea is fantastic. And if you haven't read it, I don't know what you're waiting for. If you have, I'm so happy for you because it's so amazing. And then the last thing that I'll talk about, my favorite read of the month, and my final 5-star obviously, was The Extraordinary Disappointments of Leopold Berry by Ransom Riggs. This is the beginning to a new fantasy series from him. He's the author who also wrote the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children series. And that one's more like Tim Burton does X-Men. This one is more like if Tim Burton did a fantasy version of Stranger Things. So we follow our titular character, Leopold Berry, and his mother passed away before the start of the book. And so he's dealing with kind of grief around his mother's passing and kind of finding his new normal. And one of the things that he used to do with his mom was they would rewatch this VHS tape of this fantasy show. And so he's like obsessed with it. And things start to happen, and he has these kind of weird visions that are kind of attributed to maybe migraines, maybe post-traumatic stress. It's unclear what's really going on with him, but he sees this mechanical raccoon that's from this magical world, and he kind of finds his way there. So if you're somebody who grew up loving kind of like Harry Potter or those kinds of series where it has this hidden magical society underneath the veneer of the more modern, traditional human society, then this book is kind of for you. And as always, Ransom Riggs has these kind of like sinister, eerie, like vibes to everything, which is why I always kind of equate him with Tim Burton, because it kind of just, that's the vibe that I always get. There's always something kind of off or creepy or weird. And this book is no exception. It really surprised me and I loved it so much. And I actually was lucky enough, because this is a book that I got sent to me by Penguin Teen, so thank you so much to them. And they sent me a really fancy version of it, so one second. So like I said, a lot of this book starts with the fact that he used to watch this VHS series with his mom. And so they actually sent me this very cute box that looks like the VHS tape. And I feel like a real, like I've arrived as an influencer, because it's like personalized to me, which I also love. I'm so happy that I love this book so much. And so if you are somebody who grew up in the 90s or early 2000s, like this is such a fun series and I can't recommend it more highly. Like only book one is currently available, but like it's so good. And there's just this kind of quirky, like buying a portable hole. Like it's just so good. And I can't. Like, I am so happy to have read this book and to have gotten this amazing copy of it. The book itself also looks like a VHS tape, which I think is just an added fun touch. And it is kind of middle grade. I would say older middle grade. You do have a lot of themes around him struggling to find his relationship with his father and dealing with grief with his mom. His dad is a little bit kind of abusive, almost like adjacent. He's very overly aggressive with how he tries to motivate his child. And so I do also love seeing how Leopold was starting to grow into himself and starting to define his relationship that he wanted with his father. And it's so good. It's so good. And I literally have never heard anybody else read this book besides me. So please read it and come talk to me about it, because I love it. I love it. And I hope you love it too. But that will do it for wrapping up all of the books that I read in the month of August. Please, as usual, if you want to talk about any of these books, I'd love to chat with you down in the comments below. If you want to talk spoilers, just make sure you say spoilers, hit enter a bunch of times, and then let's chat. If you just want to leave an emoji, I don't know, is there some kind of like VHS or tape emoji for the extraordinary disappointments of Leopold Berry? Then that will be what it is. Other than that, please do all of the things. Like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more bookish shenanigans like this from me or from Katya. And that will do it for today's video. So I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!